welcome to the next of our webinars. You're all very welcome. I know there's a few people still joining, so let's give it a couple of seconds and then we'll get kick-started off. Okay, so we get started. I know there's still some people joining in, but we'll try and keep to the schedule as much as possible. So you're very welcome. This is the next in the County Leadership Series, which is managing your county teams. My name is Lynn Savage. I'm National Development Manager with Ladies Football. So if you have any questions throughout this evening session, as per the screen there, feel free to put them in the Q&A or to type them in the chat, and I'll either get back to them at the time or get back to them at the end. If you can't hear or at any stage, if you leave the webinar and come back in, it should click back in for you. So we will get started, but as I said, please feel free to write any questions and we'll keep it as interactive as possible. So in the webinar, what we're going to look at is the selection of management teams. I know a lot of counties will have done this already, but it's just a little brief at the start around the structure in case there is any of your teams you've not yet selected, but also just ensuring for going forward that you have the structure of it. Solid foundation. So what's the foundation you can put in place to make sure your relationship and everything else is working well throughout the year. And then obviously the key to all of this with your county management teams is communication. So they're the three areas that we're going to look at. So firstly, if you just want to type in the chat there, do you have your county management teams in place for 2025? So if you just type Y for yes or N for no. Okay, so there's a few coming in there. So most people have yes, they do have, but there is a few that don't. So there will be a mixture. So as I said, even if you do have, we'll talk through just very brief at the start around that process, just making sure you have it, because even if it helps you prepare for the year after, that's perfect also. So your number one role when you are looking for a management team is looking after your players. So that's the number one role. You're getting somebody who's going to look after your players. And this quote that's there, somewhere behind the athlete you've become and the hours of practice and the coaches who've pushed you is a little girl who fell in love with the game and never looked back. Play for her. And this is really important because if your players are not enjoying playing with your county teams, well, then they're just not going to play for them. And it is really important that we remember that our sport is a pastime, and that there has to be enjoyment in that, regardless of the highest level that you're playing at. If players are not enjoying it, they will not play or they will not have a good experience. So it's really important for you as a county executive to remember the people you put in place to look after these teams is really, really important. And we'll talk a little bit about the type of people you put in for the different age groups now in a second. But it's a nice quote to kind of start off with, just around thinking about the type of people that you're putting for each team. This was a little study that we actually done through Ladies Football. So this is coming from our own players. It's not anybody else. And it was through the underage intercounty teams up to adult. But it was how important would the following be to keep you involved in the future? And it was rated as very important or essential. So they all come back as, but the reason we're showing you this, yes, teammates is key. Okay, so 93%, but 92% was around the coach. So if the right coach is not in there, it could have a major impact on keeping the players involved in the future. So that's again why we're stressing getting these things right and putting the right people in and working with them throughout the year is really, really important. What's interesting as well, 83% is very high for parents. So how can you as a county executive kind of work with the management team to make sure the parents feel included and that they feel their daughters are being looked after in the setup? So what we want to get, I suppose, across all our teams, and if you think in your own county, what you want is players when they enter in from under 14 up at intercounty level, 14, 16, minor and adult, that we keep them for as long as possible. So we want more players, better players come the adult. So if they're doing the same thing at under 14 as what they're doing at senior, they're not going to be there because they're going to be bored with the same thing over and over again. So it is really important that you look at, okay, what's the type of player we want to have at senior level? Okay, what does that player need to know when they're a minor? What do they need to know when they're under 16? What did they need to know when they're under 14? And it creates kind of a county player pathway for yourself. The under 14 manager does not need to nail all the skills of the game, everything that makes them look like a senior footballer. They need to nail what needs to be done for that piece of the jigsaw up to under 14. The same then for up to under 18, the same then or 16, and then the same then for up to under 18. So it builds and builds and builds. And not the same girls will be involved at all of those age groups, because some with different maturation rates, some girls may not be selected on teams and there might be new players coming in. But it is really, really important. There's no point in having a coach who is really good or a manager who's really good with senior teens, but isn't great with younger age groups. And just because they were a really good coach, oh, do you know what? We'll put them with the under 14s, but actually they're not the right coach and manager to develop that age group. So you need to match the type of coach for the skill set and the type of coach that needs to deal with that particular age groups. And we've seen a lot more of that, particularly at under 14 level. Over the last number of years with the change to the structure with the Festival of Football, you see a lot more coaches allowing music blast out of dressing rooms and dancing and singing. It's their first introduction to county football and they're really letting them enjoy it. And a lot of the teams that are flourishing and actually reaching finals are those teams that are being allowed to express themselves that way. So if you have a coach who's and manager who's not really like understanding that, well then why are we putting them at that age group? So this is just really important to look at. We want them to be lasting longer. So to do that, everything to do at each age group up has to be different. It has to look different and it has to be with different people. So when you are putting those in place, and as I said, I know a few of you have already put your managers in place, but identifying the vacant roles, so that's why we're going to just fly through this piece. Have your role description for each of those, and you'll see on our website there's samples of all these. You advertise it, then there's the application and interview, there's selection of your management teams, and then the key piece, which is sometimes forgotten, is the written agreements, and I'll show you a sample of those. Agreed budgets. So that is done at the start of the year. What's the budget for each team? And that's right up 14, 16 minor adults. What's the budgets? And then ongoing communication and review. So throughout the year, and then an end of year review. So we'll see mainly from the agreements piece to the end of year review, what does that look like? Because a lot of counties will have done the other steps before that. So I suppose we want you to think about is if you've been involved before or even thinking of future, are your relationships with county mentors like this? So they're all working really well, everything's joined in, you're all of the same thinking, a really good understanding, you have a clear communication setup, etc. That's where you want to get to. So thinking of working with management teams before, has it been like that? Or has it been more like this? Okay, it can be a wild raft at times in that you feel the executive's going this way, the management team's going that way, you're not sure where the budget went on this, they're away doing this. So that's what causes a huge amount of difficulty. So all the stuff we're going to show you here now is very basic, but it stops that raft taking off, that you have nuts and bolts in place from the start of the year to make things much easier. So this is the key piece of it and trying to avoid that raft for yourself. So as I said, everything, a lot of the things in relation to the interviews, the role descriptions, there's samples of all those on our website. So they're up there on the website in the hub in case you do need any of these. For any of you who have your managers already selected, well then there is sample agreements there. You may have your own, and even with these, they're sample. It's important that you add your own touches to them. But it is key that you have agreements signed with all your mentors, 14, 16, minor and adult. Because when something goes wrong, and hopefully it doesn't, you have nothing to fall back on. And you have a manager saying, I didn't realize I couldn't do that, or I didn't realize I wasn't to do this. All of that should be in your sample agreement. So the sample agreements are there. Some of these documents, so there's the sample role description. Again, all samples, so up to each county to adjust these. If you haven't got your managers in place, they're there. Again, sample different role descriptions to have for different managers. There is another sample of the application form, but most counties have this done already. And you can see even in the application form there, it does ask about having a budget and coming with the budget. So there's no point in saying, geez, they were a great interview, everything else, and then you realize for this to happen, the budget is way out of our reach. Okay, so it is important that you understand what the budget is as well. For the interview, And most of you will have done this who have put your candidates in place, who will be on the interview panel. So we'll be saying at least two and a maximum of five. So for example, the chairperson, another executive member, a former player. And what a lot of counties have done now is actually taken a former player from outside their county. So they have an experience of being a county player, but yet they're not maybe influenced from others. But it's completely up to you who you think, and an independent person. And it's really important to have somebody independent who can kind of say, no, that's just because you knew them or just because of history. Select the same questions that will be asked to all candidates. So if you are having interviews, you can't ask different questions to one candidate and not the other. So it's the same questions given a fair interview across the board. You can forward a topic in advance if you'd like candidates to do a presentation. That could even be as simple as on the budget, if you want them to do a presentation or send you something in advance. And then ensure you have an interview score sheet, because if you've interviewed four people, for example, one gets offered it and the other three are asking why didn't they get it, you have to be able to answer that. What's the areas they fell down on? Where did they actually lose marks? So they're just in relation to the interview. And then the key piece, as I said, which is really where we're focusing on in this session, is the signed agreement. So really clarity for everyone. Who will this manager and their team be reporting to? What's their duties and responsibilities? What's the length of the term? Is it a 1-year term, 2-year term, 3-year terms? That's very clear. Area in relation to safeguard and conduct and vetting to make sure they have all that in place. Expenses, how's that going to work? Is there travel expenses? The release of players, so what way is it going to work for your club players being released? Some managers, for example, with the split season, it is very much dedicated that the first part of the season is for the county player taking priority with the county team. But there is managers who will say, well, we have X amount of players who actually are not getting a lot of county football, but they're on the squad, but we'll release them to play club football. So it's getting an understanding agreement at the start of the year so that there's no players getting caught in the middle. The dress code, so if you're giving them a tracksuit, etc., what are they wearing? Because they are representing you when they're out on the sideline. What will happen if there's disciplinary procedures? And then what if there is a grievance procedure? So they're just a sample of some of the stuff that might be in the agreement. And you will cater them to meet your own needs. Also, you might ask them for a sample budget. I mean, this is just a very rough one in relation to it, but getting them, so this could be an adult one. You're asking them to put in everything they think it will cost for the year. What you are asking them to do is budget from when they start to the All Ireland final date, because that's your ideal. Everybody wants to be there at the end of the year. You might not think it's possible, but you never know. So it's better knowing what's the worst case scenario so that you're trying to fundraise, etc., for that amount. And if there's some left over, great. That'll help kickstart the following year. But it'd be worse if you're halfway through the year and realize there's not enough money to keep this going in relation to the budget. So having those budgets, and this should be for every team, not just the adult team, a budget for each, so that there's clarity there for the under 16 manager wants to get in a nutritionist for a talk. Well, was it part of the budget? Okay, so it is really important that all the budgets are agreed, clarified. And by you having your 14, 16s minor and adult budgets, maybe instead of having to do 10 different fundraisers across all these teams, is there one that could be done to match what that full budget is for all teams? So there's different ways to make it a little bit easier for people in the county to do it. The Intercounty Support Scheme, of course, will be there for the adult teams as well. And there'll be more information sent out in this over the next week or so, just waiting on final confirmations. But it is a joint submission. So again, working with your adult manager in relation to this, the totals, all the details will be sent out. But it is essential for the county executive, so particularly the chair, secretary, the manager, captain, and GPA player to agree together. So you agree it together, you sign it off. But to stress to the county, this is just to assist costs, but does not fully cover. So when your manager, for instance, produces the budget does not have to match the exact amount. Actually, it shouldn't, because the charter is higher. So there's certain pieces, maybe they want a license for a certain software, which is not covered through this. That doesn't mean you can't agree for that. It's part of the budget that will come out from the county themselves. So it's important to work together and have an agreed charter in place and keep reviewing this. Any issues that there is tends to be around not discussing, not having open communication. When people work together, it makes it much easier. And it then helps you to get those solid foundations in place for your county team. Solid foundations, the biggest thing is communication. So regular meetings between stakeholders. And as I said, I'm talking about 14, 16s, minor to adults. It's all your teams. All key stakeholders meet at the start of the year to agree a standard. So the county executive or whoever is designated should meet with each team individually and agree a standard. It also can be a good idea to get actually all your managers in the one room to meet each other even. Because for some counties, the 14s manager might not even know the minor manager. So just to get everyone meeting. It's important that everyone believes in the system, understands it and experiences. So what are we hoping to achieve as a county? What do we want our senior players to look like, our adult players? Down, down, down. So there's an understanding of what is a measure of success. And the biggest measure of success is that all the players who are involved in those teams want to play again next year. That is the number one measure of success. I mean, you can win All Irelands and still have 10 players not at all happy and not wanting a bit to do with the county team next year. So the measure of success is not always a cup. It's really important around the environment and people who want to be involved in it. Continually plan, do, and review. So when you do meet, and we'd recommend, we'll talk about a designated contact from the executive with each team to meet at least monthly. Okay, what's the plan for the month? What are we going to do it? How do we need to review what happened last month? So regular meetings and keeping everybody will continuously improve what you're trying to do as a county with each team. You designate that county executive point of contact for each team. So who is it that's going to be the point of contact with your senior team, with your minor team? So instead of them coming to 10 people and maybe getting 10 different answers, that there is a designated point of contact. Yes, that point of contact will come back to the full executive, but just having that point of contact is really important. That point of contact will meet, as I said, at least monthly. Just sit down half an hour before training, not even that. Okay, maybe it's sitting with the manager, the captain, and the designated point of contact, and perhaps the FLO. Okay, how's things going? What do we like in relation to X, Y, and Z? How's the budget? So that there's complete clarity throughout, and it does really develop a positive working relationship across your teams. The mentor code of conduct is completed, so have all the mentors signed up to it, everyone who's going to be involved in those teams. And remember that if you have even a minor player involved in a senior team, that's still a minor player, apart from anti-doping, where they'll be counted as a senior player in relation to it as well. But the mentor code of conduct is really important, that they've signed up and it reminds them of their responsibilities as role models. The player code of conduct should be completed with the mentors so that they agree together what's their teamwork, what's their team ethos, and also reminds them of their responsibilities as county players. So what is the responsibilities? And it is great to see so much now. You see after a lot of our games, young players running out and looking for autographs and everything else. So they really are role models. So what is the code of conduct? If there is an issue, how do we actually deal with it like adults in relation to senior teams? So that we're dealing with it together, working internally first and trying to sort out issues. Even with underage, how does a young team get their voice? Is it through the captain, the FLO? So making sure everyone feels like they have a voice through it. Agree steps for any orders required for the team, and they should only be ordered by the county executive. So if there is footballs, for instance, X amount would have been in the budget, it's working with the point of contact and who is it that orders them. You don't want an issue where at the end of the year there's a massive bill arriving from some particular supplier and the executive didn't even know the equipment was ordered. There is only one county board, and it is really important that the mentors understand they are technically recruited for a role and representing that county. They're not a separate entity, so that they understand this is how the orders actually happen. Agree protocols for fundraising. So as I said, is it a fundraiser together? Is it separate teams? How much is going to be fundraised? And remembering there can only be one bank account. So teams cannot set up separate bank accounts. There is one county. I cannot stress that enough. And there has been issues at times. So there's one county, one bank account. And yes, there's an agreement. And that's where you have your budget at the start of the year. You've signed off on. Yes, naturally the adult budget will be the biggest. But that doesn't mean everyone can't fundraise together with an understanding that you're all working together for the betterment of the county. Or it can be separate, that's no issue. But whatever you agree as a county. And then agree protocols for overlap with other teams. So if there is age grades, which is really only minor and senior now. Obviously, the rest are on their own. But what is the agreement if there is training, if there is games, to make sure that a player doesn't get caught in the middle of that? The player should always get the opportunity and should play with their own age grade first. They will never have the chance to go back to that age grade. They'll always have the chance to keep going up, but they'll never have the chance to play with that minor team again. So, but all that needs to be agreed at the start of the year instead of a player getting caught in it later on in the year. For permission forms as well, instead of maybe having to do separate permission forms for everyone, and this is something we talk with the female liaison officers with as well, that you could build all into one form at the start of the year. So maybe put travel permission on it, overnight, photography, text messaging, anti-doping consent, even though, as I said, it will only be adult teams, but there is some underage teams on it. Data protection consent. So all of those things could be on one form at the start of the year instead of needing 10 forms for it. And for adult players, data protection consent. So if you're going to be keeping the fitness testing results, for instance, and contact details, that there is consent there to actually keep these details for each of the players. So they're just some of the permission forms, and it's something that we would put as a role with the female liaison officer. But for you as an executive, when the female liaison officer sits down with you at the start of the year, it's important that you say, okay, this is part of the role in relation to what we want you to do. For the pre-season, and we are pre-season at the minute, it is important that you have a clarity of purpose. Everybody working within that county, whether it's executive, the players, the management, managers, you are all doing it because you want your county to be better. You want your county to keep improving. So instead of everyone going off on different tangents, and that's where sometimes conflict comes, how do we make sure we all have a clarity of purpose and we're working together? So an initial meeting, setting the standard and agreeing guidelines. What does it mean to represent this team? Okay, the purpose. We're all in it together. This is what we want to see. What words would be like associated with the county going forward? So what are our values? It'd be so nice if you think about it that if your under 16 player was able to list out the values that have been involved, that your senior players, your adult players were listing out the same values. So what's the values of being associated with it? How will you achieve the above? What must we do to reach this? So what's the approach to make sure we are matching our values? Okay, there's no point in saying under 14, we're going to be inclusive, but the same players are going on the time and there's other players not feeling included, so that we are matching our values. What do we need to do differently? And what are our accepted behaviors? So if we have a value of respect, and yet you have somebody on the sideline who is certainly not respecting, whether it's match officials or their own players or opposition, they are not matching your values. So what are our accepted behaviors? Meet teams separately, and then, as I said, it can be good to actually pull them together as well, so they can see they're all getting the same messaging. Shoot for the stars. You may not get the stars, but you may get to the moon. So I said everybody does aim to get to the All-Ireland final. That's the ambition for everybody. So you're aiming to get there and you're aiming to go, okay, what's the best we can do as a team? Okay, and the best that you achieve in it is because of the environment, the atmosphere that you create from it. So just for a second there or two, if you want to type in the chat, just what do you think is the role of the female liaison officer? Because you, and it's one of the things we say to the female liaison officer, they should sit with you at executive level because it may differ from county to county. So it is important that you discuss with them at the start of the year what you think their role is. So just type in the chat there for a second what you think the role of the female liaison officer is. And I'll give it a second for some of them to come through. Okay, first one there is yet to link back to the county or the county executive. So been on it. A voice for players, female presence on the team, ensure all players are heard. Yeah, that they feel they have that voice, really important. Okay, a trusting person for players. So a number of different things coming in there. Link back to the executives. Yeah, so a good few things coming in there. The female liaison officer is so important. Cannot stress this enough. There's so much time spent on getting the manager and everything. Of course, that's key. But you shouldn't just be ticking the box for putting anyone in for the female liaison officer. they are the person who are the glue at times that keeps that team together, that the players can chat to, the management can chat to, and the county executive can chat to. And I know many teams that managers have come and gone, but the female liaison officer has been there forever. Because they've become nearly a mother figure in a way, but in a nice way, as in they're trusted. The players really trust them. So for the female liaison officer, this is some of the teams, but it can alter, as I said, from your own teams, but you agree this with each individual FLO. This is what we want of you for the year. So a female presence on the management team. Liaise between the county team, so the management of the players and the county board, and obviously your county executive will have a link, so they create a real strong bond across it. Liaise between the players and the management team. And there is times that players, maybe they're not feeling great and they're afraid to say it to the management team in case it might affect them being selected or whatever it is. So it's important that that person is there, a neutral person. And that's where, when you're thinking of that FLO, if it is somebody who's closely linked to somebody in the management team, for instance, well, then are they neutral? Are the players really going to tell them the ins and outs of what it is? So getting a neutral person. Ensure training and training methods are appropriate for females and target age group. So this isn't saying that they're a coaching expert, that they're like, that drill was crap or whatever. It's not that way. It's more if they're with a team and, for instance, that team over X number of nights are consistently getting sick. That is not appropriate training methods. Yes, you would always have one girl at a time who just might not feel great in a particular night, they might be sick. But if it's something that is pushing outside of what they should be doing, it's not appropriate, and it is important that they're looking out for that. It could be a younger team lifting weights that they shouldn't be. Okay, they have their body weight. So just looking out for appropriate training methods. Ensure the code of ethics is adhered to. So that's your code of conduct, your permission forms we mentioned before. Act as an advisory resource for players. So players will come to them looking for advice, and that could be not always playing advice. It could be personal advice. Maybe they're struggling time-wise, study-wise, and maybe it's medical-wise, health-wise. So an advisory resource for players. Monitor dropout from county teams. So if a player drops out, and county football is not for everyone. So if a player drops out, okay, that could be a thing, but ask them why. Is there something that could have kept them there? And more importantly, if a number of players drop out, why is that happening? Okay, so we need to get answers to these instead of saying, oh, they were given the opportunity, let them off. They cannot be involved in selecting the team. They're not a coach. They're not involved in selecting the team. And you can see from all of the above the importance of them being neutral. So if players thought they were part of the selection of them, they're less likely to have those conversations. So it's really important that they're neutral. And they can be the key for communication with players. So really think about, have we got the correct person in this role? And sometimes teams will ask us, oh, can we have a number of people? It should be a female liaison officer. Somebody who builds constant trust relationship, builds relationships with those players over the year, and that they feel they can talk to. So getting the correct person is key. And communication then, which is the final piece that pulls it all together, I suppose. So that in season, so just because the season started, you have your monthly meeting with the contact, but actually designating an in-season ongoing review of purpose. So we said something at the start, are we matching it? Are we meeting it? Communication is key. It's the heart of great teamwork. I find at times when we get called to go in and help teams, it's because communication is broken down. Okay, so if we can keep open communication from the start, it keeps things much easier. Communicate well and often, and promote sharing of ideas, asking for feedback, and being open to constructive criticism. And that's on both sides. So for a management team to be able to take criticism, maybe with stuff that's not been done well or communication's not working well, but also for you as an executive, if a management team is coming and saying, listen, we're finding it impossible to do X, Y, and Z. This is something, if you could change how we do this, it might help. So working together in relation to constructive criticism. Some useful strategies, you might have a leadership group in your teams. So you can touch base instead of maybe a captain feeling, geez, it's only me that's speaking on behalf of the players. Is there a small leadership group within that team that finds it easier to open up and speak to the manager, speak to you as a county executive? Monthly hot wash meetings with the full group. The county executive inform the management what's going well, what can we do better, and vice versa. As I said, these can even be 20 minutes before a training session or after a training session. But it is really nice to actually, and for players as well, to see the executive and the management working well and trying to do things better together. It really does work. Regular peer reviews help. Everybody wants to help the county excel. So what's one thing we're doing well? What's one piece of advice we could do to do things better? Players are doing that internally, but you as a group, it's important that you're working on it as well. So keep talking about those, having those regular meetings. And if open communication is there, you don't always have to agree on everything, but at least you're leaving that meeting in agreement with whatever that was and moving on. And then your end of season review of purpose. So too often the season ends and that's it. Yeah, they decide the management team staying or they're going or they're finished or whatever. But it is so important that you sit down and as close as possible to the end of the season, while it's still fresh in your mind with that management team, even if they have said they're leaving, because you do want to listen to them and see, okay, what could have been done better? What did they, or where did they feel they brought the team to? So of all the things we did in the last 6 months, what are we most proud of? And there has to be loads because you're actually nurturing a group of really fine women across all these teams. So what is the things that we are really proud of? What else? Because there's more. There's more than one. Make a list of all the things. How did you manage to do all that? So what was the cogs, going back to that image I showed earlier, that made it work well? Because if that worked well, then we bring that into next year instead of starting from scratch again. We know they worked well. What are our strengths? Okay, what was our strengths throughout the year? What difficulties or problems have we tackled successfully? So there is going to be difficulties or problems, of course there is, but how did we tackle them? How did we make a success of them? How did we do it? What was helpful to you to get the best out of the team in the last year? So that's both the manager with their team, but also you as a team together. What worked? Did the monthly meetings work? Was it fortnightly? Did they link with the county executive? What made it work well? And write down what you specifically appreciated about the management team, the county executive, and how they helped. And it's also no harm to put the captain, and it could be the GPA rep or the captain and the vice captain, that you actually all show, okay, what do we appreciate for how this actually worked this year? So really having open communication and working together to meet the purpose of what you're trying to do over the year. Effective communication, it'll be clear, so present it clearly, be concise, correct, complete, courteous, and constructive. If we all work that way for our communication, it avoids a lot of other C, which is conflict. Okay, so clear, concise, correct, giving all the information, being courteous, and being constructive will avoid a lot of conflict. And that's exactly what we don't want. We want effective communication. These are just a few scenarios, and we're not going through the answers to them tonight. It's more for you to think about them. Have a think after tonight's session. Discuss with your executive, because what if this happened? How would you deal with it? So what we're trying to do is get you to be proactive and say, okay, if this happened, how would we deal with it? Versus being reactive, that it happens now and it takes us 2 or 3 weeks to actually act on it. So senior county team has a match on Sunday. Will the county minors have a match on Saturday? 2 players playing both. What happens? So going back to a few slides ago, when we said having an agreement about what happens with players who'd be on both teams, agree it now at the start of the year so players don't get caught in the middle of this. What happens? A student nutritionist offers to give sessions to the team. What do you do? The key thing you're talking about here as an executive is that nutritionist is not qualified yet. Okay, so you have to remember you're giving information to players that could be life skills. Are they qualified people? The coach of a men's team offers to take the squad for a session. What do you do? Again, to discuss as an executive, it's not saying it's the right or wrong thing to do, but you do need to make sure that they understand the game before the coach and what's the background in coaching. Okay, the same whether that was a men's team or a women's team or anything else, what do you do? So having these scenarios, if this does happen during the year, what are we going to do? The manager's looking to take the team on a training weekend. What steps do you take? So again, instead of this happening, then going, oh, geez, where do we start? Okay, if it wasn't the budget at the start of the year, well then get the steps done now while everyone has time to do it. What's the steps they're going to take? A mentor is continuously using foul language to players. What do you do? That manager, remember, that mentor is representing your county, wearing your colours. What are you going to do? Because it's not good. It's the environment you're allowing as your players. What are you going to do? A player approaches you saying the manager is bullying her. What do you do? So again, these are discussions to have. And what I would request you to do is actually sit with your executive and say, okay, what other scenarios might come up during the year? What's things we might come across? Can we keep a note of these? Write a little note of how we're going to deal with them so that we actually have this, even to pass on from executive to executive with issues that may have potentially happened. It is much easier to be proactive than to have to react to something that's happened. So, kind of wrapping things up, imagine that we return here next year. We're incredibly enthusiastic about the past year. I said, it's not always about our Ireland medals. There's loads of different reasons you'd be incredibly enthusiastic. What would we say happened? If you think for a second, what would make you sit here this time next year going, or even maybe you're sitting now because you're so enthusiastic about what happened in this year. What happened? What would you be excited by? So what's the things that you would really like to have been in place that would have done that would excite you? It is so important to have that vision because if you don't have that, you don't know how to get there. Okay, so now if you can think what we said would happen, what would excite it by, the next thing for you to do as an executive is sit and discuss, well, how are we going to make that happen? Okay, how are we going to make that happen? What's the steps? What do we need to put in place to make sure it does? So last little question before we wrap up. I'm going through there a few bits and pieces over the evening. Is there now further steps you can put in place with your county management teams? Or do you feel you have them already done? But is there further steps? You can say Y for yes or N for no. And as you are putting in the yes and no, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in there as well, because we're just coming to the wrap up. Okay, so good to see a good few yeses coming in. And I said, I know a large number of county teams have their management teams in place, and that's great. So we kind of flew through that section. But it is the other piece around what you can do after that and what you can do now for the coming year that's really, really important. So good to see everyone's coming in with yeses. So if everyone picks up one thing they can do, that's really, really positive. So that's literally this session. If you have any questions, I'll stay on, of course, for a few minutes, or feel free to reach out to us at any stage at all and we'll answer any questions for you. But I do hope you picked up something that would help you for the year. It's not easy managing it all, particularly you have multiple teams with your 14s, 16s, minors and adults. But it is important that they're all treated like that there is agreements in place for each age group, because you don't want anyone going rogue as such, but also it helps them to know, okay, that's what I have to do, or that's the structure I have to do. So spending a bit of time now saves a hell of a lot of time during the year. It really does. So thanks a million. And I said, if you have any questions, I'm going to hang on for a few minutes. And if not, the best of luck and a very happy Christmas. I'm allowed to say it now. We're close enough. But hope everyone has a nice time over the break.